The conflict between Israel and Hamas rages on as Gaza suffers a worsening humanitarian crisis. Hello, I'm Arnold Knight, and this is The Heat. The Israeli military assault on Gaza continues as it pursues its campaign against Hamas. According to the Gaza government's media office, the death toll there is now more than 13,300. Among those killed, over 5,600 children. Meanwhile, negotiators are still trying to reach an agreement aimed at releasing some of the hostages being held by Hamas. And a delegation of Arab Islamic foreign ministers is in China as Beijing tries to assist with peace efforts. We will get to all of that in a few moments, but we begin with an update on the evacuation of some premature babies from the besieged Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza. Noor Harazin has this report.
Al-Shifa hospital, it is like a closed Israeli military base now, and we are talking about hundreds of people that are actually still inside the hospital. There is 3 doctors that are inside the hospital with them. However, there is no connection, there is no network. People and the doctors, other doctors cannot call them or talk to them. The premature babies that were inside the Al-Shifa hospital after the evacuation were evacuated yesterday to the Emirati hospital in Rafah and now to Egypt. However, 8 of them actually died. 4 died inside the Al-Shifa hospital before the evacuations, and 4 died on the way from Gaza to Rafah. So there is only 31 premature babies that the doctors managed to evacuate, and they are on their way to Egypt.
That was Noor Harazin reporting. Well, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Jerusalem is Sara Yael Hirschhorn. She is a historian and political analyst. With us too is Khalil Jashsan. He is the executive director of the Arab Center in Washington, D.C. Also joining the discussion is Trita Parsi. He is the Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. And with us from Beijing is Victor Gao. He is Chair Professor at Soochow University. Welcome to all of you. Sarah, Israel is being accused of an assault on a hospital in Gaza. However, Israeli officials, as well as the Israeli military, say that there was a Hamas tunnel complex underneath, including a command and control center at the Al-Shifa hospital compound. So far, Israel has not provided any evidence of that. How does Israel continue to justify the humanitarian crisis that we are seeing? You know, as I said, 13,300 people killed. Among those killed, 5,600 children.
As you said, the Israeli military believes that the Al-Shifa hospital is a nerve center of Hamas operations, possibly even the location where some of the hostages taken from Israel on the 7th of October were stored away for some time before the IDF invaded the Gaza Strip. There was evidence of a few hostages killed, perhaps on the perimeter of the hospital, or their bodies were found on the perimeter of the hospital. So the IDF maintains that the Al-Shifa hospital has for a long time been known as a command and control center of Hamas, and the Biden administration provided some independent discussion or independent verification of these claims. And there have also been statements made to the media by doctors and other medical personnel, as well as UN agency heads, and other aid agencies that have been active in Gaza, that this has been known widely for some time. What the IDF now needs to prove to the international community is that the cost to humanitarian life and the disruption of the normal function of the Al-Shifa hospital, which does function as a real hospital, while perhaps also still being a nerve center of Hamas operations, is justified, particularly from the point of view of crimes committed in wartime, as a part of this larger Gaza incursion or Gaza operation. At the same time, I think we should take the Hamas death toll figures not at face value. Of course, the Gaza Ministry of Health is a Hamas adjacent agency, And while the humanitarian crisis in Gaza certainly continues to deepen and the disruption of function at the Al-Shifa hospital is part of that story, I think we should take those numbers with some grain of salt.
Khalil, Jashsan, what do you make of what Sara just told us there, that the numbers are in dispute? That's one. And the other is that Hamas have been using the hospital as a base.
Frankly, I have great respect for Sara as an academic. However, it seems to me that she is mimicking a lot of the hasbara talking points that the Israeli government keeps circulating in the absence of credibility thus far with regards to all these accusations. For example, she's talking about the charge that there might be a tunnel complex under the Al-Shifa hospital. There are, of course, tunnel complexes under all of Gaza. So what's so surprising about having it essentially as an emergency passage to the hospital if needed during any Israeli invasion of Gaza? That has been needed in the past, and it's probably needed today. Having tunnel complexes, Sara, there are tunnels under the White House, for God's sake. What makes that a crime against humanity until you prove so? When you prove so, release it. And I'll be the first to come and acknowledge it and apologize. But they aren't. I mean, we're talking about leveling the ceiling of, lowering the ceiling of these charges from being the command center, as even the President of the United States fell into Netanyahu's trap and repeated it, then they had to eat his own words. It is not proven yet. Sara, in these times in Israel, only a couple of months ago, showed us a video bragging about the most sophisticated hospital, one that I know personally, Rambam in Haifa, that is all underground. The whole parking lot, all the tunnels under the hospital have been turned into the most modern emergency hospital for use basically during times of war. So talking about a nerve center that hasn't been proven yet.
Yeah.
Finding 5 Kalashnikovs in a room in the basement of the hospital, that could be the guards' storage.
Yeah.
Any home in al-Fahim or Taibi has more than 15 times these machine guns in their basements.
Okay, Khalil.
I think that 30,000 soldiers of Hamas left 5 guns indicates it's an armory. I mean, come on.
Khalil, I want to ask you about an attack on another hospital. That was the Indonesian hospital in Gaza.
Yes.
The head of the World Health Organization says he is, quote, appalled by the attack on that hospital. 12 people were killed. But Israel says that its forces were fired upon from within the hospital. I mean, what do you make of that and the Israeli narrative that it has the right to respond, even if it's a hospital?
It doesn't have the right to respond to resistance even from a hospital, okay? It does have the right to respond from anywhere else where it is being attacked and it perceives that as a threat to its security, like any other state. But attacking hospitals is an excuse. And essentially, it was an attempt to try to ethnically cleanse a whole area of the Gaza Strip, forcing more than 1.7 million to head south. This is the equivalent, Anand, of forcing 244 million Americans to leave the northern part of the United States to be cornered in 5 or 6 southern states so that a foreign enemy occupying American territory can have its way with them. Expel them, shoot them, I don't know. I mean, the Israeli army seems to be acting like it's on a safari trip. The whole ethnic cleansing and attacks on hospital seems to be part and parcel of an attempt to depopulate Gaza and force its population of 2.3 million into the Sinai Desert or somewhere else.
All right, let me give Sara a chance to respond to that. Sara, we've heard this before. Israel is being accused of ethnic cleansing.
Look, Israel maintains, and I would hasten to say that I'm not a spokesperson for the behalf of the state of Israel. I'm a visiting lecturer at Israeli University, but I'm not an Israeli citizen. I am not on the payroll of the Israeli government. But they maintained that they had tried to relocate the population of northern Gaza to southern Gaza in the interest of their security while they were carrying out and continue to carry out ongoing military operations, including, very sustained aerial bombing and ground incursions into northern Gaza. Now, what happens when the Israelis have apparently, completed their mission in northern Gaza? What then will happen? Are they planning to go into southern Gaza in a more serious way? What will happen to the population there? Will they ask them to then relocate to the north? Yeah. It all seems very unclear. There are extremist Israeli ministers in the Knesset who would like to see the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, but I think the majority of the government and most Israelis, frankly, want to see Gazans, stay where they are in the Gaza Strip. And Egypt certainly has been entirely uninterested in aiding and abetting any kind of ethnic cleansing operation by opening the Rafah corridor and allowing Gazans to even take shelter temporarily in the Sinai, both for their own strategic reasons and their fears of letting in Hamas terrorists into their own territory as part of humanitarian sheltering, but also because I think they are concerned about the long-term strategic plans of the state of Israel, which it doesn't seem to clearly have at the moment beyond.
All right, I want to move on.
Of disarming Hamas, we don't really know what their intentions are for the Gaza Strip.
Right, Sarah, I want to move on. Trita, Parsi, what is your assessment of where things stand right now? This is more than a month after that initial attack in Israel by Hamas and, of course, the Israeli onslaught on Gaza. It doesn't look like it's coming to an end soon. In fact, the Israelis are now talking about taking over southern Gaza.
Certainly, it's not looking as if it's coming to an end, nor would it, mindful of the fact that the Biden administration has not put any meaningful pressure on Israel to move towards a ceasefire. Only at that point do I think we would see some movement towards ending this conflict, or at least this chapter in the conflict. And I think at the same time, what we're seeing just in the last 48 hours is that the initial perception that perhaps the risk for a regional escalation wasn't as great as initially feared because of some of the messages coming out of Hezbollah, etc. We've seen that is now seems to have been overtaken by events because we're seeing an escalation. Both we saw the Houthis taking an Israeli ship, we saw Hezbollah striking an Israeli base. There's going to be more incremental steps, unfortunately, that all run the risk of completely escalating this conflict and leading to a regional war, which means that the Biden administration's strategy of trying to contain the war to only Gaza is increasingly looking to be a failure.
Trita, that's right. There was that Hezbollah attack on the Israeli military installation in northern Israel. So very briefly, how great is the risk now that this could turn into a regional conflict?
I think the risk is significant. Israel is obviously going to respond to this. As I understand that there were no casualties at that base. So perhaps it was a calculated effort by Hezbollah not to escalate too far. But take a look at the ship that the Houthis took. It was a partially Israeli-owned ship. Did the Houthis know that there were no Israeli crew on it? We don't know if they knew or didn't. But they probably hoped that there would have been. Now, imagine if there had been 10 Israeli crew members on that ship that would now be hostages in Yemen. Is Israel going to start carpet bombing Yemen as well? Would it put pressure on the United States to take military action? So far, I think we have to be honest and say that it's frankly been more luck than strategy as to why this has not escalated into a regional.
Victor Gao, great to have you with us. Victor, let's talk about some of the diplomatic efforts to try and end this crisis. A delegation of Arab and Islamic foreign ministers is in Beijing. They've called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Here is the Chinese Foreign Minister, Wang Yi. Let's listen to him.
The international community must act urgently and take practical and effective measures to prevent this tragedy from spreading. Since the outbreak of the conflict, China has stood firmly on the side of justice. We have been working hard to de-escalate the conflict, protect the safety of civilians, expand humanitarian assistance, and prevent a humanitarian disaster. We call for a return to the two-state solution and the early realization of a comprehensive, just and lasting settlement of the Palestine issue.
Right, Victor, that delegation is led by the Saudi foreign minister, but also includes the foreign ministers of Jordan, Egypt, Palestine and Indonesia. So what role can China play in finding a solution to this crisis?
Thank you very much. I think all of us here in China warmly welcomes the joint delegation of these Arab and Muslim countries. And I think it is very important that this visit by this delegation is in China for the first stop. They are going to Moscow to talk to the Russian government. And I think of key importance is that both this delegation and the countries they represent and the larger community, that is the Arab countries and the Islamic countries they represent, and China, both call for immediate ceasefire. This is very important because the atrocities, the tragedies, the slaughterings that we witness for people throughout the world really is going beyond any bounds that's allowed by international law or human conscience or whatever morality you can think about. I hope the Israeli government and the people in Israel will treat the Palestinians in Gaza as much as the Jewish people and the Israelis in Israel. Don't do unto the Palestinians in Gaza what you do not want to be done to yourself. And I think bombing hospitals, schools, UN facilities, other countries' facilities, etc., killing more than 10,000 civilians, including 65 of them, women and children, is really beyond anything that the international community will accept. And this will be carved in history. And if such atrocities continue, history will come back to Israel. And Israel will be haunted by this kind of disproportional level of force against the civilians in Gaza. This is why I think this joint delegation is in China. China is, for this month, the president of the Security Council of the United Nations, and China has been doing its best to call for ceasefire ever since the breakout of this hostility in the Security Council of the United Nations, at the UN General Assembly at large. So I do hope the delegation and the Chinese government will figure out a way to put more pressure on Israel to see with their own eyes that such atrocities are not tolerable by mankind and by human conscience. They will need to bring this to a stop as quickly as possible, because the world will rise up in indignation against such atrocities committed by Israel.
Trita, China has been involved in the Middle East recently. They were key in those mediation efforts to reduce tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia. That led, of course, to the reopening of diplomatic links between those two countries. Do you think there needs to be more involvement from countries which are outside those that have been traditionally involved with mediation efforts between the Israelis and the Palestinians? I'm thinking of the EU and especially of the United States. Do you think China can bring a new approach to the table?
I think the existing constellation of countries that have led the mediation thus far clearly have failed. We should not be in this situation if they had succeeded. And I think it's also very important to note that prior to the Hamas attacks against Israel on October 7th, what both the Trump administration was doing and what later on what the Biden administration was picking up was to pursue an approach towards the region that moved beyond the Palestinian issue. The effort was to integrate Israel into the economies of the rest of the Middle East without resolving the Palestinian issue and then calling that peace. I'm referring, of course, to the Abraham Accord, which, in my view, contributed to this horrible situation we're in right now, in the sense that the extent to which the world was, through the leadership of the United States, expecting that millions of Palestinians simply would have to accept that their fate is to be indefinitely under occupation, sooner or later would lead to a return to violence. And that's unfortunately what we have seen right now. So I think it's clear that in order to actually get some sort of a solution to this, there is going to be a need for a different constellation of countries. That doesn't mean that the United States should be excluded.
Yeah.
But anything that is relying exclusively on the United States at this point is essentially dead on arrival.
Sarah, I'm going to turn now to the hostage situation. Hamas holding about 200 hostages, and there appears to be a great deal of anger in Israel from the families of those hostages who are accusing the government of not taking enough action, of not acting with the kind of urgency that this needs. What is your view on what is happening in Israel as far as freeing those hostages? I mean, where is public sentiment?
Well, today we believe that there are over 240 hostages currently being held in Gaza, and including 2 new babies that were probably born in captivity in the last month. We should note that today is International Children's Day, and China, as the current sitting head of the United Nations, hopefully could exert some pressure on returning these children, over 40 of them under the age of 18, to Israel. Certainly, there is great anger that now it's been, more than a month and a half, and there are still 240 hostages in Gaza. Their whereabouts unknown, except for we have some new reports suggesting that not all of them are even held by Hamas or under the Hamas command and control structure. That frankly, some of them may be even out of reach of the Hamas leadership itself. So there's very dire reports coming out of Gaza, and some hostages have also been found dead near or around the Al-Shifa hospital. Only 4 hostages thus far have been released over the last month and a half, and mediation efforts seem to have failed. Certainly, there is a change in public opinion in Israel. The first to say that there was a march from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in the last 2 days of hostage families, condemning the Netanyahu-led government for their lack of exigency in returning their hostages. Yeah. There's also some questioning, I think, by the Israeli public of the war aims. Once the question of hostages is taken off the table, Israeli public opinion for a larger or continued operation in Gaza, beyond the war aims that have been currently achieved, seems to fall dramatically. The main priority of the Israeli civilian population is the return of hostages. And if that's no longer a possibility because these hostages are no longer alive, or no one knows where they are, or Hamas is unwilling to return them, and return them in full because the Israeli public demands all women and children to be released as a first interim step, not only some of them, but all of them, and certainly all hostages, including men, women, and children, I think that, we're really at a stalemate. And those calling for a ceasefire should understand that Israel has no intention of engaging in a ceasefire until the hostages are returned. So that has to be on the table to see any end to hostilities in Gaza.
Khalil, as I said at the beginning of the program, this violence is raging on in Gaza, but there is already talk of what happens post-Gaza, as it's being put. The Israeli intelligence minister, Gila Gamliel, says Palestinians in Gaza should be resettled in other countries around the world. That's what United States financial aid should be used for, to resettle all 2.3 million Palestinians. We've heard an Israeli minister talk about using a nuclear bomb in Gaza. That was subsequently walked back. You heard others talk about the annihilation of those people in Gaza. So what happens next?
Well, first of all, these statements, again, this is evidence back to Sarah. I mean, she did not deny that there are some members of the cabinet, but frankly, members of the cabinet in Israel that are under the prime minister's control. After all, he's the one that said, I'm in charge here, I make policy. So any pronouncements by these guys reflects whether he likes it or not. He can deny it as much as he wants. These are his own colleagues in the cabinet. Now, any other country that has ministers like Gamaliel, like Smotrich, like Ben-Gvir, and many others who keep talking about from the nuclear option to this ethnic cleansing option that Gamaliel is talking about, they would be called fascists. As a matter of fact, they would be called Nazis, as a matter of fact, in any fair assessment of their pronouncements. So the solution on the day after is very simple: self-determination for the Palestinian people. I agree with Biden that the West Bank and Gaza need to be reunited as one country to basically govern the Palestinians effectively. However, the details of his plan are lacking. The two-state solution is dead, has been dead for decades. Nobody wants to pay for the funeral. That's why it's still kicking. The same thing with the parties. He's, one day he talks about Egypt being in charge. One day he's talking about Jordan being in charge. One day he's talking about the PA. None of these parties can control a reunified Palestine. The solution is in the hands of the Palestinian people. The population of the West Bank and Gaza on day one, when there is a ceasefire, need to have free elections under international supervision, conducted by the United Nations, and let the Palestinians choose their own leadership. The problem is here in Washington, because last time they did that, the U.S. was the first country to reject the results of those elections.
Yeah, Victor, there's one other diplomatic effort underway, and that is a virtual summit. South Africa has announced that it will host a virtual summit of the BRICS countries. President Xi Jinping of China will be attending that virtual summit. What do you think can come out of that?
I think China supports whatever initiative in the world by whichever country or groups of countries which are aimed at achieving lasting peace for Israel as well as for Palestine. The Chinese President Xi Jinping already agreed to attend that virtual summit proposed by South Africa, so we are looking forward to that. Allow me to make one point. I think if the goal for everything that we witness in the Middle East is for lasting peace for Israel, it cannot be achieved by Israel continuously denying the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people. Because denying the Palestinians of their legitimate rights to their own country, to Eastern Jerusalem as their capital, and to their border at 1967 border, for example, will fuel more hatred and will fuel more hostility, and will deprive anyone in Israel of the lasting peace that all of us want to see. Therefore, it is time for the Israelis to really become very philosophical and try to see what's the best way to achieving lasting peace, rather than try to seize Gaza as if it will be Israeli land. Never. It will never be Israeli land, and the Palestinian people will always be entitled to their legitimate state in Israel.
Okay, Sarah, I've only got 30 seconds, and if you could respond to what Victor is saying, his point being that Israel can never have security if it continues to deny what Victor called the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people.
I think that's absolutely correct, but there's going to have to be a new reevaluation of the land for peace rubric of the two-state solution, because Israel's feeling is that it got a rum for peace instead of land for peace. And while there may be some other arrangement that needs to be made very, very quickly in agreement with Victor to ensure peace and security for both Israelis and Palestinians, the framework upon which this may be undertaken and mediators who may need to negotiate it may have to change.
Right, and that is where we have to leave it. Thank you to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.